The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the typical arrogance that had defined interstellar politics for over 3,000 years. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated sections, their various forms of communication filling the air with clicks, hisses, telepathic waves, and melodic tones that the universal translator struggled to keep up with. At the center of the circular chamber, a holographic display showed the current state of the Outer Rim War. Red zones marked Zorathi-controlled territory, steadily expanding like a cancerous growth across what had once been peaceful trade routes. The insectoid Zorathi had been unstoppable for 18 months now, their bioships adapting to every defensive strategy the Galactic Defense Force threw at them. The situation grows more desperate each cycle, announced High Counselor Vextari, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into dancing rainbows across the walls. We have lost 17 systems in the past lunar period alone. Our conventional forces are simply no match for their adaptive biology. General Karath of the warrior caste Thurians slammed one of his 4 massive fists against his desk, causing several smaller species representatives to flinch. Then we must commit more resources, deploy the 7th and 8th fleets. Sacrifice is the price of victory. Spoken like a true Thurian, came the dry response from Ambassador Quilix, whose slug-like form glistened with disdain, always believing that throwing more bodies at a problem will solve it. We need strategy, not senseless violence. The debate that followed was predictable. The militaristic species called for overwhelming force. The scientific caste proposed technological solutions that would take years to develop, and the diplomatic factions suggested negotiation with beings that had already demonstrated their complete unwillingness to communicate beyond conquest. It was during this familiar cycle of arguing that a soft chime indicated a new presence requesting permission to address the council. The chamber's attention turned to the small observation deck where junior members and petitioning species were allowed to witness proceedings. A figure stood there that many had forgotten was even present. Humans had been granted observer status in the Galactic Council only 53 years ago, when their primitive chemical rockets had finally achieved faster-than-light capability. They were a young species, barely out of their own planetary atmosphere, when most of the Council races had already been exploring the stars for millennia. The human representative was a female of average build for her species, wearing the simple gray uniform that Earth's diplomatic corps had adopted. Her name was Sarah Chun, and she had been sitting quietly in the observer section for over 2 years, rarely speaking, apparently content to simply watch and learn from her betters. The chair recognizes the human observer, High Counselor Vextari announced, though her tone carried the same patience one might use when allowing a child to speak at an adult gathering. Sarah Chun stepped forward to the communication platform, her movements seeming almost primitive compared to the graceful gliding of the ethereals or the perfectly coordinated march of the synthetic collective's representatives. "Honored counselors," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics, "my species would like to offer our assistance in the current conflict." The silence that followed was not one of consideration, but of barely contained amusement. Several representatives exchanged what could only be described as knowing looks, though the specifics varied greatly depending on their biology. Ambassador Quilix was the first to respond, his translation device giving his words a patronizing tone. "Young human, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is warfare on a scale your species has never encountered. The Zorathi bioships are living creatures the size of your largest cities, with adaptive armor that learns from every weapon we use against them. Their ground forces can reshape their molecular structure mid-battle. This is not a conflict that can be resolved with your primitive kinetic weapons and chemical explosives." A wave of what passed for laughter rippled through various sections of the chamber. The ethereal's crystalline bodies chimed with harmonic amusement, while the Thurians produced a series of rumbling growls that indicated humor among their kind. General Karath leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the communication platform. "Little human, Your species has been in space for less than one of our military cycles. The youngest warrior in my command has more battle experience than your entire military combined. Return to your small blue world and leave warfare to those who understand it. But Sarah Chun did not retreat. Instead, she remained standing calmly at the platform, waiting for the amusement to die down. When the chamber finally quieted, she spoke again. Respected General Karath, you are absolutely correct that we are inexperienced in interstellar warfare. However, we have extensive experience in a type of combat that seems absent from your military doctrine. This time, the silence held genuine curiosity rather than amusement. High Counselor Vextari's crystalline form shifted slightly, indicating interest. Explain. Asymmetrical warfare, Sarah replied. For our entire recorded history, my species has faced situations where conventional military might was insufficient. We developed techniques for fighting larger, better-equipped enemies using precision, stealth, and unconventional tactics. We call it guerrilla warfare, and we have refined it through thousands of years of conflict. The Synthetic Collective's primary representative, a perfect chrome humanoid, tilted its head at an angle that would have been impossible for an organic being. Define guerrilla warfare in tactical terms. Sarah seemed to have anticipated this question. Small unit operations designed to maximize enemy casualties while minimizing your own. Precise targeting of critical infrastructure and command elements. Hit and run tactics that prevent the enemy from using their superior numbers effectively. Most importantly, the concept of force multiplication through accurate, long-range elimination of high-value targets. You speak of assassination, General Karath growled, and his tone carried clear disapproval. Honorable warriors face their enemies in open battle. With respect, General, honor is a luxury that the dead cannot afford, Sarah replied evenly. The Zarathi are winning because they adapt faster than your forces can respond. But adaptation requires time and learning. If you eliminate the organisms responsible for tactical adaptation before they can process and share new information, you break their cycle of improvement. The chamber had grown genuinely quiet now. Several of the more intellectually oriented species were clearly processing the implications of what the human was suggesting. Ambassador Quilix's form rippled with what might have been thoughtfulness. You propose targeted elimination of enemy command structures. This requires precise intelligence and the ability to strike at extreme range without detection. Our current reconnaissance indicates that Zarathi bioships maintain their adaptive control organisms in heavily protected core chambers. Exactly, Sarah confirmed, which is why we propose the deployment of human sniper teams. The term required translation for most species present, and the results varied wildly. The Thurians interpreted it as something roughly equivalent to long-range honor dueling, while the Ethereals understood it as mathematical precision killing. The Synthetic Collective simply filed it under optimized target elimination protocols. Explain these snipers, High Counselor Vextari requested. Sarah gestured, and with permission from the Council systems, a holographic display appeared showing a human in camouflage clothing, lying prone behind what appeared to be an extremely long and precisely engineered projectile weapon. Human snipers are specialists trained to eliminate specific targets at extreme range, often from concealed positions. Our best can accurately engage targets at distances exceeding 2 kilometers using weapons that fire solid projectiles at supersonic velocities. The projectiles are specifically designed to deliver maximum kinetic energy to a precise point, regardless of the target's defensive measures. 2 kilometers? General Karatha's laugh was a rumbling earthquake. Our plasma rifles are effective at 10 times that range. Yes, but with respect, General, your plasma rifles announce their position the moment they fire. They also rely on energy-based damage, which biological organisms can potentially adapt to over time. Kinetic projectiles, however, operate on basic physics. You cannot adapt to having a hole punched through your vital organs at 3,000 meters per second. The synthetic collective representative's head tilted further. Elaboration required. How does projectile velocity overcome adaptive biological armor? Sarah smiled for the first time since addressing the council, and several representatives noted that the expression seemed to carry a predatory quality that was unexpected from such a seemingly fragile species. Because no matter how tough your armor becomes, it still has to obey the laws of physics. Our snipers use tungsten core ammunition traveling at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. The kinetic energy involved is roughly equivalent to being struck by a ground vehicle moving at maximum velocity, concentrated into an area smaller than your smallest finger. The chamber was now completely silent except for the quiet humming of life support systems and translation devices working overtime to convey concepts that many species had never encountered. Dr. Yultera of the Healer Caste finally spoke, her melodic voice carrying obvious concern. Such weapons would cause massive trauma to biological organisms. The damage would be extensive. That is the intended result, Sarah confirmed without emotion. The goal is not to wound or disable. The goal is immediate termination of the target's biological functions. Barbaric, whispered someone from the Peaceful Coalition section, though the translation made it unclear exactly who. Effective, countered Sarah, and given that the Zarathi have shown no interest in peaceful resolution, effectiveness should be our primary concern. High Counselor Vextari's form shimmered as she processed this information. Even assuming your weapons could penetrate Zarathi bioarmor, how would your snipers reach positions where they could engage targets within these protected core chambers? That would require detailed intelligence about Zarathi bioship architecture and patrol patterns, Sarah admitted. However, humans have extensive experience in infiltration and reconnaissance. We have operated successfully in hostile territory throughout our history. The Zarathi bioships are in space, pointed out General Karath. Your species requires atmospheric breathing apparatus for extended operations outside your natural environment. Correct. Which is why we propose joint operations with species that can provide transportation and life support. Human snipers would handle target elimination, while allied forces provide insertion and extraction. The debate that followed was intense and prolonged. The military representatives were skeptical, but intrigued by the concept of precision elimination of enemy command elements. The scientific castes wanted detailed specifications of human weapons technology and accuracy capabilities. The diplomatic factions raised ethical concerns about assassination tactics. Through it all, Sarah Chun stood calmly at the communication platform, answering questions with technical precision and emotional detachment that impressed even the synthetic collective. She provided ballistic data, explained the physics of projectile weapons, and detailed the training regimens that human snipers underwent. Most impressive to many representatives was her response when asked about the psychological effects of long-range killing on human operatives. Human snipers are selected and trained specifically for their ability to function effectively under extreme stress while maintaining precise motor control and emotional stability, she explained. The psychological impact is managed through comprehensive support systems and the understanding that each successful engagement potentially saves hundreds or thousands of allied lives. Finally, High Counselor Vextari called for a recess to allow private consultations among the various factions. As the chamber began to empty, many representatives paused to look more closely at the small human who had proposed such a radically different approach to their current crisis. During the recess, informal conversations revealed a surprising development. Several of the more pragmatic military leaders had begun calculating the potential impact of precision strikes on Zarathi command organisms. The numbers were intriguing. General Karath, despite his earlier skepticism, found himself in deep discussion with the Synthetic Collective's Tactical Analysis Unit. If human claims about projectile weapon effectiveness were accurate, and if insertion could be achieved, the potential for disrupting Zarathi adaptive cycles was significant. When the council reconvened 3 hours later, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. The initial amusement had been replaced by serious consideration, though skepticism remained high. High Counselor Vextari addressed Sarah Chun directly. Human representative, the Council has discussed your proposal. While we appreciate your species' willingness to contribute, we have concerns about the practical implementation of your suggested tactics. Sarah nodded acknowledgement, but said nothing, waiting for the full explanation. Firstly, there is the matter of proof. Your species' claims about these sniper weapons are impressive, but unverified. No member of this council has witnessed human military capabilities in actual combat conditions. Secondly, continued General Karath, the insertion of personnel into active combat zones within Zarathi bioships would require unprecedented cooperation between human operatives and alien support teams. Such operations have never been attempted. Finally, added Ambassador Quilix, there is the question of scale. Even if your techniques prove effective, can a handful of human specialists significantly impact a war that spans dozens of star systems? Sarah Chun had clearly anticipated these objections. Honored counselors, we understand your concerns. We propose a demonstration of capability followed by a limited trial operation. If our methods prove effective, the scale can be increased. If they fail, the risk to allied forces will be minimal. What sort of demonstration? Inquired Dr. Yultera. We have identified a Zarathi forward outpost in the Kepler 442 system. Intelligence indicates it is lightly defended, but contains several high-value biotechnological assets. We propose a joint operation to eliminate specific targets within that facility and gather intelligence on Zarathi adaptive capabilities. The chamber buzzed with rapid consultation among various delegations. The proposal was limited enough to minimize risk, but significant enough to provide meaningful data about human capabilities. After nearly an hour of debate, High Counselor Vextari announced the Council's decision. The Galactic Council will authorize a limited joint operation to test human sniper techniques against Zarathi forces. The operation will be conducted under Thurian military oversight with ethereal reconnaissance support and synthetic collective tactical analysis. She paused, her crystalline form refracting the chamber lights, as she focused on Sarah Chun. However, we emphasize that this is a trial only. The Council remains skeptical that any single tactical approach can significantly alter the current strategic situation. Sarah Chun bowed respectfully to the Council. Understood, High Counselor. We will not disappoint you. As the session concluded and representatives began filing out of the chamber, many cast curious glances at the human observer section. The small, seemingly primitive species had managed to convince the galaxy's most advanced civilizations to try something that had never been attempted in the history of interstellar warfare. What none of them realized was that Sarah Chun had not told them everything about human military capabilities. She had not mentioned the psychological warfare aspects of sniping or the profound effect that sudden, inexplicable deaths of command personnel could have on enemy morale. She had not explained the human concept of one shot, one kill, or the almost mystical reputation that skilled snipers had developed throughout human history. Most importantly, she had not told them about Marcus Rodriguez. 3 days later, as the first joint task force prepared to depart for the Kepler 442 system, Sarah Chun stood in the observation deck of the Thurian battleship Vengeance, watching as a small human transport docked with the massive alien vessel. The war was about to change, though the galaxy didn't know it yet. The figure that emerged from the human transport was unremarkable by most species standards. Average height for a human, lean build, dark hair showing traces of gray at the temples. He carried a long, carefully sealed case and moved with an economy of motion that suggested complete familiarity with his own capabilities. Marcus Rodriguez had been killing enemies of humanity for over 20 years. He held records for the longest confirmed kill shot in human military history, had operated successfully in dozens of hostile environments, and had never missed a target when it mattered. The galaxy was about to meet its first human sniper. As the task force prepared to jump to hyperspace, Marcus stood quietly in his assigned quarters, carefully assembling and checking his rifle. The weapon was a work of art as much as a tool of war, precision engineered to deliver tungsten core projectiles with mathematical accuracy across distances that would seem impossible to most galactic species. He had studied the intelligence reports on Zorathi biology and architecture. He had identified his targets and calculated firing solutions. He had prepared for contingencies that his alien allies couldn't even imagine. Tomorrow, the Outer Rim War would begin to turn. The galaxy had dismissed humanity as primitive and inexperienced. They were about to learn that sometimes the most advanced civilizations forgot the most basic truths about warfare. The most effective weapon wasn't always the biggest or the most technologically sophisticated. Sometimes it was simply the most precise. The Zorathi forward outpost, designated Target Alpha, hung in the darkness of space like a malignant tumor, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with the rhythmic patterns that indicated active biological systems. Unlike the geometric ships favored by most galactic civilizations, the Zorathi vessel resembled something that had grown rather than been built. Organic curves and flowing lines gave it an alien beauty that masked its deadly purpose. Commander Thexvar of the Thurian military observed the target through the tactical display aboard the battleship Vengeance, his 4 arms manipulating multiple control interfaces simultaneously. Reconnaissance confirms the intelligence reports. He rumbled in his species' characteristic bass tone. The outpost contains 3 primary biological control nodes, heavily defended by adaptive armor plating and internal security organisms. Beside him, the ethereal tactical coordinator Yil Senna floated in her containment field, her crystalline form refracting data streams into visible light patterns. Long-range scans indicate the presence of at least 47 combat-capable Zorathi organisms within the structure. Energy signatures suggest active adaptation protocols in response to our surveillance. Marcus Rodriguez stood quietly at the edge of the briefing area, studying the tactical display with the focused attention that had kept him alive through 2 decades of warfare. Unlike his alien allies, he wasn't looking at the ship's defensive capabilities or the number of enemies inside. He was looking for sight lines, cover positions, and structural weak points that computer analysis might have missed. The primary target is here, Commander Thexvar indicated, highlighting a section deep within the bioship's core. The master adaptation node coordinates all defensive and tactical evolution for this sector's Zorathi forces. Eliminating it would significantly disrupt their operational effectiveness. Distance from potential firing positions? Marcus asked, speaking for the first time since the briefing began. Yil Senna's form shimmered as she processed the question. Estimated 800 to 1,200 meters from accessible exterior positions to the core chamber. However, the target will be surrounded by multiple layers of adaptive bioarmor and defensive organisms. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. 1,200 meters was well within his effective range, assuming he could establish a clear shot. The challenge would be penetrating the ship's hull and internal defenses without alerting the entire outpost to his presence. What about insertion? He inquired. Commander Thexvar's expression carried the skeptical confidence that was typical of his species. Thurian assault protocols call for overwhelming force applied at multiple breach points. We penetrate their defenses, establish fire superiority, and advance to the target location. That won't work, Marcus said quietly, and the certainty in his voice made several alien officers turn to stare at him. Explain, Thexvar demanded, his tone carrying just a hint of challenge. The moment you breach their hull with conventional assault tactics, every Zorathi organism in that ship will begin adapting to your weapons and tactics. By the time you fight your way to the core chamber, they'll have evolved countermeasures to everything you're using. The target will either be heavily defended or have already relocated. The Synthetic Collective's representative, designated Unit 77 Alpha, tilted its chrome head with mechanical precision. Alternative approach requested. Marcus turned to face the tactical display, using a laser pointer to indicate specific locations on the bioship's hull. Here and here. These sections show the characteristic thermal patterns of biological waste processing systems. They're likely to have minimal defensive coverage because nothing important goes in or out through waste ports. You propose infiltrating through their excrement disposal systems? Commander Thexvar's tone carried obvious distaste, even through the universal translator. I propose using whatever route gives me the highest probability of reaching firing position undetected, Marcus replied matter-of-factly. Comfort is irrelevant if you're dead. Yilsena's crystalline form chimed with what might have been amusement. The human approach is pragmatic. However, the distances involved would require extraordinary accuracy. Our analysis indicates multiple layers of biomatter between any exterior position and the core chamber. What's the composition of their hull material? Marcus asked. Unit 77 Alpha processed the question with mechanical efficiency. Adaptive chitin-based matrix with integrated metallic elements. Estimated density equivalent to 47 centimeters of hardened titanium steel composite. Marcus smiled grimly. My rifle fires tungsten core ammunition at 2,800 meters per second. That much bioarmor might slow it down, but it won't stop it. The briefing continued for another hour, with various specialists providing detailed intelligence about the target facility. Marcus absorbed it all, mentally cataloging information about patrol patterns, structural layouts, and defensive capabilities. But his attention focused most intently on the architectural scans that showed the internal geometry of the bioship. Unlike the regular corridors and chambers typical of constructed vessels, the Zarathi ship's interior followed organic patterns that seemed almost random. Flowing passages curved and branched like arterial systems, while major chambers bulged outward like internal organs. It was beautiful in an alien way, but it also presented unique tactical challenges. The insertion team will consist of 3 members, Commander Thexvar announced, bringing the briefing to its practical phase. The human sniper, obviously, myself as team leader and heavy weapons specialist, and reconnaissance specialist Kathera from the ethereal contingent. Marcus looked up from his analysis of the structural scans. With respect, Commander, I work better alone. All 4 of Thexvar's eyes focused on the human with obvious surprise. Alone? That is tactically inadvisable. The Zarathi facility contains numerous hostile organisms, and you will require support for extraction after the primary mission is completed. I'll handle extraction myself, Marcus replied. Multiple team members means multiple potential detection points, multiple sets of equipment signatures, and multiple variables I can't control. This kind of operation works best with a single operator. The debate that followed was intense, but brief. Commander Thexvar argued for team cohesion and mutual support. Yilsena pointed out the statistical advantages of redundant personnel. Unit 77 Alpha calculated probability matrices for various team configurations. Marcus simply waited for them to finish, then spoke quietly. How many successful sniper operations have been conducted by this task force? The silence that followed was answer enough. How many has my species conducted? According to your submitted records, human military forces have completed over 43,000 documented sniper kills in the past century alone. Unit 77 Alpha replied with mechanical precision. Then, maybe we should try doing this the way that's worked 43,000 times before, Marcus suggested. In the end, compromise prevailed. Marcus would infiltrate alone and engage the primary target, while a support team stood by an extraction position. If the mission succeeded, they would assist with his withdrawal. If it failed, they would attempt to complete the objective through conventional assault. 6 hours later, Marcus floated in space 50 kilometers from the Zarathi outpost, encased in a modified EVA suit that the ethereals had adapted specifically for this mission. The suit's biomimetic coating was designed to register as background cosmic radiation to Zarathi sensors, while its internal systems maintained life support without generating detectable energy signatures. In his hands, Marcus held his rifle, modified with a specially designed scope that could interface with his helmet's targeting system. The weapon itself was a masterpiece of human engineering, capable of delivering precise fire across distances that most galactic species considered impossible for projectile weapons. The approach to the target took nearly 2 hours. Moving in microgravity without using detectable propulsion required patience and careful calculation of momentum vectors. Marcus used tiny compressed gas thrusters sparingly, mostly relying on carefully planned trajectory adjustments to bring him into contact with the bio-ship's hull. The waste port he had identified proved to be exactly what he had expected. A sphincter-like opening barely large enough for a human to squeeze through, located in a section of the hull that showed no signs of active monitoring. The biological material was warm to the touch and had a texture like living skin, which was disturbing but not entirely unexpected. Getting inside required patience and a strong stomach. The port dilated slightly in response to pressure, apparently designed to accommodate waste materials of varying sizes. Marcus worked his way through slowly, careful not to trigger any defensive responses from what was essentially a living ship's digestive system. The interior of the Zarathi vessel was unlike anything in Marcus's experience. Corridors pulsed with bioluminescent lighting, while organic walls showed the rhythmic contractions of some vast circulatory system. The air was thick and humid, carrying odors that human olfactory systems weren't designed to process. Navigation proved challenging. The structural scans had provided a general layout, but the organic architecture didn't follow logical patterns. Passages branched and merged like blood vessels, and some corridors actually changed configuration as Marcus watched, apparently responding to some internal biological imperative. It took 47 minutes to reach a position with line of sight to the core chamber. Marcus found himself in what appeared to be a maintenance shaft that ran along the ship's central axis. Through a translucent section of the organic wall, he could see into the chamber where the master adaptation node was located. The target was unlike anything he had ever been asked to eliminate. The master adaptation node resembled a massive brain, easily 3 meters across, suspended in a chamber filled with bioluminescent fluid. Tendrils connected it to various organic computer interfaces, while smaller organisms moved around it in patterns that suggested complex biological data processing. More challenging was the fact that the target was protected by layers of defensive organisms that moved in apparently random patterns around the chamber. Slug-like creatures the size of large dogs crawled along the walls, while floating jellyfish-like organisms drifted through the fluid medium. All of them showed the characteristic adaptive coloration that indicated active defensive programming. Marcus settled into firing position, bracing his rifle against an organic support beam that felt disturbingly like cartilage. The shot would need to penetrate the translucent wall, pass through approximately 6 meters of bioluminescent fluid, and strike the master adaptation node at its most vulnerable point, all while accounting for the movement of defensive organisms that might block the projectile path. Through his scope, Marcus could see details of the target that the reconnaissance scans had missed. The master adaptation node wasn't uniformly dense. Certain sections showed different coloration and texture that suggested varying structural integrity. One area, roughly center mass, pulsed with a different rhythm than the surrounding tissue. That was the target. Marcus controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate through techniques perfected over 2 decades of combat. The shot would need to be perfect. Miss, and the entire facility would go into defensive mode, making extraction nearly impossible. Hit the wrong section of the target, and the adaptation node might survive long enough to process and share the tactical information about human capabilities. The defensive organisms continued their patrol patterns, occasionally passing between Marcus's position and the target. He waited, calculating the timing required to thread the projectile between moving obstacles while accounting for the fluid medium's effect on trajectory. Finally, the pattern aligned. For exactly 2.3 seconds, the shot path would be clear, with no defensive organisms in position to intercept the projectile. Marcus squeezed the trigger with the smooth, controlled pressure that had become automatic after tens of thousands of practice shots. The rifle's report was suppressed, but still audible in the confined space. The tungsten core projectile shattered the translucent wall, sending fragments of organic glass into the bioluminescent fluid. It passed between two defensive organisms with centimeters to spare, struck the master adaptation node at precisely the point Marcus had aimed for, and continued through to embed itself in the chamber's rear wall. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The master adaptation node convulsed once, its bioluminescent patterns flickering wildly before going completely dark. The defensive organisms began moving in confused, uncoordinated patterns, apparently receiving conflicting signals from damage control systems. Throughout the ship, emergency biolights began flashing in patterns that indicated severe system failures. The organic walls around Marcus began contracting rhythmically, as if the vessel itself was experiencing some form of biological distress. Time to leave. Marcus moved quickly but carefully through the now unstable interior of the bioship. Corridors that had been solid were now soft and flexible, making movement more difficult. Emergency organisms were beginning to emerge from hidden chambers, apparently programmed to respond to damage of the ship's critical systems. The extraction route proved more challenging than the insertion. Several passages had sealed themselves in response to the system failure, forcing Marcus to find alternative paths through the organic architecture. Twice he encountered Zorathi repair organisms, small beetle-like creatures that seemed focused on fixing damage rather than finding intruders. It took 18 minutes to reach the waste port he had used for entry. By then, the bioship's hull was beginning to show signs of structural instability. The sphincter-like opening was contracting spasmodically, apparently malfunctioning like the rest of the ship's biological systems. Marcus squeezed through just as the opening sealed itself permanently behind him. He activated his suit's emergency thrusters, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the dying Zorathi vessel. Behind him, the bioship's hull was developing dark patches where biological systems were failing. The organic lights that had pulsed along its surface were flickering irregularly before going dark. Without the master adaptation node to coordinate its biological functions, the vessel was essentially dying. The extraction team found Marcus floating in space 23 minutes later, exactly where he had said he would be. As they recovered him, they could see the Zorathi outpost beginning to break apart, its organic hull splitting along structural weak points as critical biological systems failed throughout the vessel. Target eliminated, Marcus reported as he was brought aboard the recovery shuttle. The facility is no longer operational. Commander Thexvar stared at the dying bioship through the shuttle's viewport, his forearms hanging limply at his sides. In 40 years of military service, he had never seen a single shot cause the complete destruction of an enemy facility. "Ow," was all he managed to ask. Marcus began disassembling his rifle with practiced efficiency. Biological systems are more fragile than mechanical ones. Disrupt the central coordination node, and everything else fails in cascade. It's like cutting the brainstem of a living organism. As the shuttle returned to the battleship Vengeance, every member of the extraction team was silent, processing what they had just witnessed. A single human, using a weapon that most galactic civilizations considered primitive, had accomplished what conventional assault forces would have required hours and significant casualties to achieve. The intelligence recovered from the destroyed facility would prove invaluable, but that wasn't the most important outcome of the mission. Word of the successful operation spread quickly through the galactic military network, reaching species and commanders who had dismissed human capabilities as primitive and ineffective. For the first time since the Outer Rim War had begun, the Zorathi had lost a facility not to overwhelming force or advanced technology, but to precise application of kinetic energy delivered by a single individual they had never seen coming. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humanity brought something to warfare that had been missing from their calculations: the ability to achieve maximum effect through minimum means. Marcus Rodriguez had just introduced the galaxy to the concept of surgical warfare. The implications would reshape military thinking across 47 different species, but more immediately, it would change the course of a war that the galactic community had been losing for over 18 months. As the task force prepared to return to Council space with news of their success, none of them realized that they were carrying more than just intelligence and a battle report. They were carrying the proof that small unit tactics and precision weapons could accomplish what massive fleets and advanced technology had failed to achieve. The Outer Rim War was about to become a very different kind of conflict, and the species that had dismissed humanity as inexperienced primitives were about to discover why evolution had shaped humans to be the galaxy's most effective predators. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 72 hours after the destruction of Target Alpha, and the atmosphere in the chamber was markedly different from their previous gathering. Representatives who had dismissed human capabilities with amused tolerance now sat in focused attention as High Counselor Vextari presented the mission analysis. The target facility was completely neutralized by a single projectile, she announced, her crystalline form refracting the tactical displays in ways that emphasized the dramatic nature of the achievement. Subsequent investigation of the debris field confirms that critical biological systems throughout the entire structure failed in cascade following the destruction of the master adaptation node. General Karatha's massive frame shifted uncomfortably in his command chair. For a species that prided itself on military prowess, the Thurians found the human approach both impressive and deeply unsettling. One shot. He rumbled, his forearms manipulating data interfaces as he reviewed the tactical recordings. A single projectile weapon eliminated a facility that would have required a full assault battalion to capture. Dr. Yiltera of the Healer Cast had been studying the biological analysis of the destroyed Zorathi vessel, and her melodic voice carried notes of professional fascination mixed with concern. The precision required for this operation exceeds anything in our military database. The projectile struck the target's neural cortex at exactly the point where maximum cascade failure would result. This suggests either extraordinary luck or unprecedented understanding of Zorathi neurobiology. Sarah Chun stood once again at the observer platform, though this time the Council's attention was completely focused rather than politely dismissive. Our sniper analyzed the target's biological patterns and selected the optimal impact point based on observable characteristics, she explained. Human military doctrine emphasizes adaptive targeting based on real-time intelligence. Elaborate on this adaptive targeting, requested Unit 77 Alpha from the Synthetic Collective. Our analysis indicates that successful completion of this mission required calculations that should have taken several hours using advanced computational systems. Sarah's response carried a pride that she had carefully concealed during her previous appearance. Human snipers are trained to perform complex ballistic calculations mentally, often under extreme stress and time pressure. Mathematical precision is a fundamental requirement of the specialty. The chamber buzzed with translation activity as various species attempted to process the concept of biological entities performing advanced mathematics quickly enough to be useful in combat situations. For races that relied heavily on computer assistance for complex calculations, the idea of mental computation accurate enough for surgical precision seemed almost impossible. Ambassador Quilix's slug-like form rippled with what might have been skepticism. Even accepting your species' mathematical capabilities, this operation required infiltration through hostile biological systems and extraction under combat conditions. The environmental challenges alone should have made mission completion highly unlikely. Humans are adapted for environmental extremes, Sarah replied. We evolved on a planet with widely varying climate conditions, atmospheric compositions, and biological hazards. Adapting to alien environments is something our species does naturally. What she didn't mention was that Marcus Rodriguez had spent the 3 days since his return studying Zorathi biology with an intensity that had impressed even the synthetic collective's learning algorithms. He had identified 17 different vulnerabilities in their bioship architecture and was already developing tactical approaches for exploiting each one. More importantly, word of the successful operation had reached Earth through faster-than-light communication networks, and the response had been immediate and enthusiastic. Military commands across human space were volunteering their best snipers for what they saw as the most significant development in interstellar warfare since the invention of energy shields. High Counselor Vextari seemed to sense that there was more to human capabilities than their representative was revealing. Sarah Chun, your species' contribution to this operation exceeded all projections. We are prepared to authorize expanded human participation in anti-Zorathi operations. What would your military require for full deployment? Sarah had been waiting for this question, and her response was carefully prepared. We would need detailed intelligence on Zorathi positions throughout the conflict zone, transportation support for insertion and extraction, and coordination with existing galactic forces to prevent friendly fire incidents. Personnel requirements? Inquired General Karath. We estimate that 50 human snipers, properly deployed, could significantly disrupt Zorathi operations across the entire Outer Rim sector, Sarah replied. Each sniper would operate independently, targeting critical biological control systems in enemy facilities. The number seemed impossibly small to representatives accustomed to thinking in terms of fleet movements and army-sized deployments. 50 individuals to effect a war spanning dozens of star systems and involving millions of combatants appeared ridiculously inadequate. Unit 77 Alpha voiced what many were thinking. Statistical analysis indicates insufficient personnel for meaningful strategic impact. Zorathi forces maintain approximately 400 major installations throughout the conflict zone. Sarah's smile returned, carrying the same predatory quality that had unsettled the Council during her previous appearance. Our analysis suggests that destroying approximately 15% of their command and control facilities would create cascade failures throughout their entire operational network. Zorathi biology depends on centralized coordination. Remove enough coordination nodes, and their remaining forces become significantly less effective. What followed was 3 hours of intense tactical discussion as military representatives from various species attempted to understand how such a small force could achieve such disproportionate results. The concept of targeting critical infrastructure rather than engaging enemy forces directly was familiar to some races, but had never been implemented on an interstellar scale. Dr. Yilterra raised a concern that resonated with several of the more ethically minded species. This approach focuses entirely on elimination of enemy personnel rather than defeating their military capabilities through superior tactics or technology. Is this consistent with accepted standards of interstellar warfare? The question hung in the chamber for several moments before Sarah responded, her tone carrying a coldness that surprised many representatives. Respected Dr. Yilterra, the Zorathi have not shown any interest in adhering to accepted standards of warfare. They consume civilian populations, adapt conquered worlds into biological weapons, and have demonstrated complete unwillingness to engage in any form of diplomatic communication. Traditional military ethics are designed for conflicts between rational opponents. When facing an enemy that views other intelligent species as raw material for biological conversion, different approaches become necessary. The blunt assessment silenced debate about ethical considerations, largely because no one could argue with its accuracy. The Zorathi had indeed proven to be unlike any enemy the galactic community had previously encountered. Their complete lack of interest in anything other than conquest and biological assimilation made conventional diplomatic and military approaches largely ineffective. General Karath leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the communication platform. Human representative, Assuming the Council authorizes expanded operations, how quickly could your forces be deployed? The first 10 teams could be operational within one standard galactic week, Sarah replied. Full deployment would require approximately 30 days, assuming transportation and logistical support from allied forces. 10 teams in 7 days. Ambassador Quilix's form rippled with surprise. Where are these specialists currently located? Sarah's answer revealed something that many council members hadn't considered. Distributed throughout human space aboard military vessels and installations. My species maintains sniper specialists as part of our standard military structure. They're available for immediate deployment upon authorization. The realization that humans had been maintaining what amounted to a standing army of precision elimination specialists throughout their territory was sobering for many representatives. Most galactic civilizations had abandoned individual combat specialties in favor of technology-based warfare centuries or millennia ago. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. For the first time in the Council's 3,000-year history, a junior member species had been granted full operational authority for military operations against a major interstellar threat. The authorization included transportation support from the Thurian military, intelligence coordination through ethereal reconnaissance networks, and tactical analysis support from the Synthetic Collective. Most significantly, human snipers would be given complete operational independence once deployed, with allied forces providing only insertion, extraction, and logistical support. As the session concluded, many representatives lingered to speak privately with Sarah Chun. The questions they asked revealed a growing awareness that humanity represented something unprecedented in galactic military affairs. The Ethereals wanted to understand how biological entities could perform calculations quickly enough to be useful in dynamic combat situations. The Thurians were curious about human training methods that could produce such consistently effective individual combatants. The Synthetic Collective requested detailed specifications for human weapons technology, particularly the mathematical principles underlying projectile accuracy. Through all these conversations, Sarah maintained the diplomatic composure that had served her well throughout the crisis, but privately she was calculating the implications of what had just been authorized. 50 human snipers, operating with complete independence throughout Zorathi-controlled space, would accomplish more than eliminating enemy command facilities. They would demonstrate human military capabilities to every species in the galactic community. More importantly, they would establish humanity as something more than a primitive junior member of the interstellar community. The war that had begun as an existential threat to galactic civilization was about to become humanity's introduction to their place in the broader universe. Marcus Rodriguez received the deployment authorization while aboard the battleship Vengeance, still analyzing intelligence data from the destroyed Target Alpha facility. The message was brief and direct, typical of human military communications. Full authorization granted. 50 teams deploying galaxy-wide. Your team leader for Sector 7 operations. Additional personnel arriving in 48 hours. He studied the tactical display, showing Zorathi positions throughout his assigned sector. 12 major facilities, ranging from bioship construction platforms to adaptive research installations. Each one represented a complex infiltration and elimination mission that would require perfect execution under hostile conditions. Marcus smiled grimly as he began planning approach vectors and targeting priorities. The galaxy had spent thousands of years developing increasingly sophisticated approaches to warfare, creating massive fleets and advanced technologies that could reshape entire star systems. They had forgotten that sometimes the most effective approach was also the simplest. Identify what the enemy needed to function, and then break it with surgical precision. Over the next several weeks, 50 human snipers would be deployed throughout Zorathi-controlled space, each carrying weapons that most galactic species considered primitive and operating according to tactical principles that predated interstellar civilization. The Outer Rim War was about to discover why evolution had spent millions of years teaching humanity to be patient, precise, and absolutely lethal when necessary. In the depths of space, Zarathi bioships continued their inexorable advance toward populated galactic systems, their adaptive armor gleaming in starlight, and their biological weapons systems pulsing with alien life. Their master adaptation nodes process tactical data with organic efficiency, continuously evolving countermeasures to the energy weapons and conventional tactics that galactic forces had used against them. What they couldn't adapt to was something they had never encountered. Enemies who struck from impossible distances using weapons that operated on principles their biological systems couldn't analyze or counter. Projectiles that traveled faster than their adaptive responses could process. Operators who appeared and disappeared without engaging their primary defensive systems. Predators who had learned patience through millions of years of hunting prey that was faster, stronger, and better adapted to their environment than they were. The galaxy had dismissed humanity as primitive and inexperienced. They were about to learn that sometimes the most primitive approach was also the most effective. The age of technological warfare was about to be challenged by something far older and more fundamental. The carefully applied violence of intelligent predators who had spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to kill things that seemed impossible to kill. 50 humans against an interstellar empire. The mathematics seemed impossible, but mathematics had never been humanity's greatest strength. Patience, precision, and the willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect their own had carried the human species through ice ages, plagues, wars, and the vast darkness between stars. The Zarathi were about to discover why that combination had made humans the most successful predators their galaxy had ever produced.